Hello and welcome to this 5-minute Bible study. I'm Carl Santos. I'm the pastor at New City Church in Calgary. So we're looking at the 25 most searched for verses on the internet. We did one last week. Here's another one this week, number 2, in no particular order. 1 Corinthians 16:13, which I must say I'm a little surprised to see on the list, but let's dive into what this means. Now, let's first look at the context. This is written to the church in Corinth, and the church in Corinth is established in Acts 18, if you want to go back and look at it. And the church is struggling. When Paul leaves, they begin to struggle in the face of things that are external and internal. So the external culture of Corinth is rife with sexual immorality, religious diversity, corruption, typical things, to be honest, of most cities of the time and even of today. And those things are pressuring the church from the outside, but it also happens on the inside. So that these things are making their way into the church. And the church is also divided on issues of spiritual gifts. I can write that one out. Sorry about my writing again. About marriage. About food. Sacrifice to idols. So I'll also write food idols. And the resurrection is a big theme in the book as well. Okay? So Paul's addressing some of these issues. But here, we are at the end of the letter, and this is part of Paul's concluding statements to them. You know, in the same way you'd end a letter to a child away at university with some advice, fatherly advice, motherly advice. That's what's going on here. And we have to remember this. The context of this is corporate. Paul is writing to a church. I know we in Canada want to take every verse of the Bible to be just for us. And although these verses can be co-opted, made for you, they are for us individually. But remember that they're primarily, in many cases, primarily for the corporate church. So we have to remember that. So Paul is trying to encourage the church in the face of disunity, issues that are threatening to destroy their unity as a church. So let's move into these words and what Paul's getting at. Let me get a different color. So first he says, be watchful. Now this term pops up in Matthew 25:13, in Mark 13:37, and in Revelation 3:3. And in each case, and very often when this term is used, it refers to being watchful for the signs of the end times. So be watchful for the signs that Jesus is returning. If Paul is using it in that context, then what he's telling the church is, hey, time is short, be watchful, look for these signs because they will be an encouragement to you, and it'll also be an impetus to remind you that there's no time to be struggling with issues of unity. Get united and start serving. But it also, if Paul just means it in a more watchful sense of just to watch in their context for signs of disunity breaking into the church, things that are threatening them as a unified church, then that's still a valid encouragement and exhortation by Paul. So either way, Paul's getting at one of those two things. So he's telling them to be watchful as a church. He then tells them, let me get another color here, to stand firm in the faith. And this means to obey and to trust. It's easy to think of standing firm as something, you stand and you set your feet and your chin against an enemy who's rushing at you. And that's partly what it can mean. But I think as a church, we could probably use more encouragement to obey. Because oftentimes when challenges come or when those things come and we think it's the enemy attacking us, we can focus so much on combating the enemy that we fail to actually obey Christ. And I think if we set our target as aiming to obey Christ, then we actually will thwart the enemy more often than not. So I would say it's part of what he's getting at here is obey in this time and trust God. So stand firm in your faith. Because remember, the issues that are attacking the church are not just forces from the outside or inside. It's actually issues with their faith. Their faith is floundering in the face of these threats. And lastly, I guess, he talks about act like men. I put it in pink. That's pretty gender interesting. So we get caught up in the gender thing today, don't we? We worry. He says act like men, and what, women can't be courageous? Let's be gentle. Let's try to meet the text in its ancient context and realize this is a man speaking in a specific time in history. So let's think of it as it was intended, which was meant to be a great encouragement, because a man in the ancient world was meant to be humble, caring, wise, strong, courageous, preferring others. And I think this is what Paul is getting at here. He is saying this is the time, and it literally says, play the man, act like a man. So when the NIV in certain translations translate it as be courageous, they're trying to get at the crux of what Paul's getting at without using the gender-specific language. But I think the language is important to keep. And then lastly, he says, be strong. And we, of course, think of being strong as Superman bending metal or iron. But the fact is, this term is used almost the 4 times it's used in the New Testament. It always refers to spiritual strength. So, for instance, when Jesus is said to have grown strong in the Spirit, when he from a child to an adult, this is the term used. So Paul again is talking about their faith and their spirituality. He's not talking about being a tough guy, an MMA fighter in the ancient world. He's simply saying, be strong in your faith. Everything that's attacking you personally and as a church is an issue ultimately with your faith. Be strong in that. Be watchful of things that attack your faith. Stand firm in your faith. Act like men, strong and faithful, and be strong in your spirit. And this is what this passage is all about.